Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Jenn Carson. James Carson was a typical American in the 80s. He married a girl named Lynne, and they had a daughter named Jenn. James was not particularly intelligent. He was more focused on family and children, always treating his loved ones with great love. He was a devoted father, but during that time, the hippie culture was gaining momentum, and James did not shy away from it. He loved to have fun and indulged in the forbidden. Nevertheless, his daughter remembered him as a very caring man who often told her stories at night. James did not work. Instead, his more educated wife, who had a decent job, provided for the family. At first, it appeared to be a loving union, but over the years, striking changes began to occur in him. He became increasingly rude and aggressive, bought himself a gun, and periodically threatened his wife with it. Lynne decided it was better to separate after 10 years of marriage. Their 5-year-old daughter Jenn was too young to understand what was happening. Most of the events that unfolded remained a mystery to her until she grew older and learned the shocking truth about her father. However, the key character in this story is not only James but also Susan, a woman born into a wealthy family in the 60s. Her father was a highly successful producer who granted her a lavish lifestyle. She could only dream of such a life. She married another wealthy man, resulting in 2 children. However, as Susan's children reached their teenage years, she grew weary of the daily routine and wanted to get the most out of life. Therefore, she began a second secret life, which she kept hidden from her family. Susan became quite dissolute, preferring much younger men with whom she engaged in intimate relationships. One of her young lovers introduced her to banned substance, which had become widespread at that time. This marked the beginning of the end of her idyllic life. It turned out that Susan had not only secret affairs but also mental health issues, which no one had ever addressed. The lack of treatment combined with her reckless lifestyle led to exacerbations of her condition, resulting in regular hallucinations, even when she was in a normal state of consciousness. One day, her husband returned home from work to find triangles drawn on all the walls. Susan spoke of visual hallucinations and showed signs of schizophrenia. Her husband uncovered her little secrets about her affairs on the side and discovered her mental disorders. However, he did not condemn his wife and took the situation calmly. Unfortunately, he was not willing to help her and simply filed for divorce. Given the problems Susan was facing, he easily obtained full custody of their children. This outcome seemed to suit her completely. She did not even attempt to challenge the court's decision. Now she was alone, without her children, and still full of a desire to have fun. Additionally, after the divorce, Susan received a substantial amount of money, which led her to throw a big party at her home, where James also appeared. Susan was almost 10 years older than James, yet he fit her interests. Their acquaintance was intensified by the use of strong illegal substances. Susan's issues escalated to such a degree that she began to believe she was hallucinating. Their meeting coincided with James's divorce, and nothing could restrain the lovers. Several months passed, and their strange relationship was marked by emotional highs and lows. Later, Susan said that she had immediately fallen in love with James and that he became the man of her dreams. He officially changed his name to Michael Bear Carson, and in 1978, they went on a trip to Europe in search of their spiritual followers. Soon, the situation only worsened, as all of Susan's savings from the divorce were spent on banned substances and entertainment. At this time, Michael was under her complete control. They believed in a fictitious religion centered around Susan, who claimed she could see those possessed by demons, distinguish witches, sorcerers, and other dangerous entities. Meanwhile, Michael became a sort of instrument for executing witches. During this period, Lynne fought to obtain full custody of Jenn. Lynne succeeded, but on weekends, Jenn had to visit her father and stepmother. Jenn found herself in a poorly organized home. She was only 4 years old at the time, later recalled entering the house to find it nearly empty, with many trees planted in pots throughout the interior. She described it as a kind of magic forest, as the house held little more than a single water bed for sleeping. From her later memories, weekends at her father's house felt like a horror movie. She did not like Susan, whom she described as a villain from a cartoon, it seemed that her father and stepmother were ignoring her existence. Jenn instinctively felt that women should not eat, and later she discovered that she preferred to starve all weekend rather than eat the food offered to her. Despite the difficulties Jenn faced, she initially did not tell her mother about the frightening real-life stories that haunted her. Instead, her memories from her early years were often filled with something terrifying. Jenn remembered well that Susan considered her possessed by demons, punished her by scratching her back, while her father blindly believed everything his beloved Susan said and supported any punishment. Jenn could do nothing to resist the much stronger adults. Susan repeatedly tried to conduct some kind of exorcism rite on Jenn, and during one of these sessions, Jenn's body bore 5 marks resembling claw scars. When Lynne noticed these marks, she was alarmed and wondered what was happening in that house. She tried to ask Jenn about it, but because of her young age, it was difficult for the girl to explain. Nevertheless, Lynne still sensed that something was wrong. It became clear to her that James's transformation into Michael was not an accidental event. In marriage, he had become much more aggressive. Lynne now believed that her daughter was in danger. Attempts to reach James were futile, as he was completely under Susan's influence. Contrary to the court's decision, Lynne took her daughter and ran away with her. Until that moment, they had lived in Phoenix, Arizona, and now they had moved to California. Lynne did not tell anyone their new address because she feared that if her actions were revealed, Jenn would be taken away and that she would lose any opportunity to see her. She felt that Jenn would not survive to enter school. Lynne did not want to contact law enforcement at all, knowing how slowly the system worked. Realizing that anything could happen during an investigation, she decided not to waste time. Lynne had to quit her job, and they lived very poorly after the escape, relying on random earnings. This escape became the second significant event in Jenn's life. The first was the sudden divorce of her parents, which she never understood because her mother and father had once seemed to love each other. As she grew older, she supported Lynne's actions. Her mother explained that her father was sick, and they just needed to stay away from him to avoid being infected. In reality, James and Susan's way of life became eccentric, spending money on substances while neither worked. They decided to move to California, possibly because, during a moment of clarity, Michael wanted to reclaim his daughter, or maybe he thought things would be better there. They had no idea where they could find Jenn and Lynne after moving. After days of wandering, Susan and Michael settled in San Francisco, where they met a girl named Karen Barnes, who was then 23 years old. Karen dreamed of becoming an actress and moved to California to try her luck in acting. Unfortunately, during this period, she met Susan and Michael, who willingly shared information about their cult. This unhealthy behavior intrigued her. The entire group ended up in a rented apartment since Susan and Michael could no longer afford housing. Karen became the first person to join this cult. She was attractive and immediately caught Michael's eye. However, he could not betray Susan behind her back, so he approached Karen openly and told her that he believed she should become his second wife. This proposition was unacceptable to Susan. She claimed to have seen the future and insisted that Karen was a witch who intended to destroy the cult and kill them both. Michael believed Susan so completely that he feared her power and obeyed her without question. Susan easily convinced him that he had to deal with Karen, making her the first victim of their cult. Michael agreed, waiting for Karen to arrive after taking a cast iron frying pan and a knife. On March 7, 1981, he hit Karen on the head to stun her and then stabbed her, inflicting 13 wounds to her face and neck in what seemed to be a ritual murder. They wrapped Karen's body in a blanket, placed her head on a pillow, and drew a series of strange symbols on the walls before leaving. Karen's dream of becoming an actress was shattered. When the door was broken down, her skull was discovered in a pool of blood, but no trace of the criminals was found, except for the drawings, which included the name Susan. The apartment had been rented by Karen, and aside from a superficial description from neighbors, there was no information about Michael and Susan. They fled, fully aware that they needed to distance themselves from the crime scene. They hitchhiked north and lived for a year in a secluded cabin in the wilderness, where no one could find them. Very little is known about this period in their lives. A year later, Feeling bored, they discovered an illegal marijuana farm outside the city and decided to go there. It was quite a large illegal organization with a lot of work and a shortage of workers. Susan tended to the plants while Michael monitored the safety of the operation, and together they continued to live their typical hippie lifestyle, remaining constantly intoxicated from substances. A young man named Clark Stevens intervened in the matter. He was a 26-year-old guy, a friend of the plantation owner. Clark was well versed in growing illegal plants, but he drank a lot, and he had his own vision that contradicted Susan's opinion. Clark took the initiative, began giving advice. Susan did not like how actively Clark was interfering in their activities. It seemed as if he was too arrogant. She turned to her husband, declaring that this man was encroaching on the sacred, putting the profit of their religion below him, which was unacceptable. Susan told Michael that she had a vision in which Clark turned out to be an evil sorcerer. Naturally, this statement automatically became a death sentence for Clark. After Clark's murder, Michael obtained a gun. It is unknown where exactly it came from. In any case, he did not use it at first. He carried it with him to guard the farm. After Clark was dealt with, his body was doused with gasoline and burned. The remains were disposed of by burying them not far from this forbidden plantation in the forest. Later, the date of death was set as May 12, 1982. It is curious that this farm was located no more than a kilometer from residential buildings. In early summer of the same year, one of the families had an outdoor barbecue. They did not go deep into their yard but moved to the far part of a large plot of land. They had a large dog that they let run around. The animal went into the forest, as if attracted by something, and when it returned, the owners noticed something strange in its mouth. When the dog approached the married couple, they discovered it was carrying a part of a human skull. Naturally, the family called the police. Law enforcement officers discovered an illegal farm that had been abandoned in a hurry. No one was there, but a group of young people interviewed by the authorities told of a pair of dirty hippies who had fled the plantation quickly. They fled by hitchhiking again, disappearing into the territory of the states. On May 1983, the area around the plantation was thoroughly searched by a team that went deep into the forest, where they found Clark's burial place and a tourist backpack. Inside, they found various items, a pistol, a fake ID, and also a manifesto describing the program of a cult-like religious organization called Hunt. The most disturbing item was a list of names and surnames of so-called witches and sorcerers that included even popular figures such as Ronald Reagan, the current president of the United States, as well as the governor of the state. The police were particularly interested in two other names, Clark and Karen, who were already listed as killed. In total, the list contained 12 people, consisting of ordinary citizens. However, it turned out to be impossible to establish their fates precisely, as there was nothing specifying either addresses or phone numbers. Due to the possibility of a national security issue, the Federal Bureau of Investigation began a search. During this period of Jenn's life, terrible changes began to occur. Her father, Michael, called Lynne and said that he was returning to California and intended to take Jenn. Lynne did not give him the address. She was very scared because she could not even contact the police for protection. However, this did not even need to be done because just a few hours after Michael's call, FBI agents arrived at her home. The authorities already knew that Michael was actually James Carson, and Lynne was his ex-wife. Jenn was the daughter whom the ex-wife had actually kidnapped. Despite this, they treated Lynne's act leniently, considering all the circumstances and the danger for Jenn. The agents knew they were dealing with a very dangerous couple of criminals. In the father's desire to take Jenn, they saw an opportunity to catch the killers. As far as the law enforcement officers knew at that time, Susan and Michael were hitchhiking, making it impossible to track their exact location. On May 12, 1983, in the car, a 30-year-old truck driver named John Hellier. A couple of young people who looked harmless were heading to California and picked up a other man. The only space in his car suitable for passengers was the cabin, but with 3 of them in the front, it was cramped. The hitchhikers began to settle inside when they climbed in. Michael saw this and was furious, as he perceived the contact of a mere mortal with the prophetess as a sign of disrespect. Susan supported his opinion. Michael took out other pistol, as the first one was thrown not far from the plantation. The cabin was cramped. John managed to start a fight. They fell out onto the road. Other motorists drove by, some even stopping to help, while Susan shouted to Michael that he had to finish off evil sorcerer. Realizing that a grown man could defeat her husband, Susan took a knife and approached John, stabbing the wounded driver. They run away, leaving John's body on the side of the highway in Napa County. Susan and Michael stole a truck and took off. However, witnesses reported to the police, which led to a big chase. Susan and Michael lost control and drove into a ditch. But they were not going to surrender. A shootout with the police began. The criminals managed to escape again, this time on foot. Susan and Michael then was miraculously detained after John's murder. No one was seriously hurt, and it was time for they of villains to face fair punishment. Although there was evidence that they had victimized others on the list, they were not required to confess, particularly to the murders of Karen and Clark. They could only be charged with the murder of John, as there were witnesses and irrefutable evidence. When Susan and Michael were brought in for questioning, they refused to cooperate with the police, demanded the involvement of all TV channels, press, and newspapers. They sought to turn their bloody tale into a major press conference in order to gain fame. Susan insisted that she was a clairvoyant, claiming this would allow them to attract as many followers as she wanted, specifically targeting young people who were as devoted as Michael. Naturally, law enforcement agencies did not want to give such attention to them. As the trial approached, their demands for media involvement were partially met, but not to the extent that Susan had wanted. There were several reporters in the courtroom. Susan claimed that President Reagan was a demon who needed to be killed. Law enforcement managed to extract the names of 2 victims. And Michael confessed to killing Clark, who had worked with them on a plantation of prohibited plants. He also spoke about the failed actress, Karen. Before the trial even began, everything Susan and Michael said seemed like a circus. Susan expressed absurd ideas that were later quoted in various reports. Several books were written about her prophecies, but few people took her claims seriously. Among Susan's statements was the assertion that all these murders were committed in self-defense. She concluded her speech by expressing her bewilderment at why their fight against evil warranted any accusations. The forensic expert detailed the atrocities committed by Susan and Michael, making it obvious that their actions had nothing to do with self-defense or fighting demons. They themselves were pure evil. Both were sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 75 years for 3 counts of murder. It was clear that the killers should never have been released. It seemed that everything was over, but Jenn's life turned into a nightmare. She accidentally learned the whole truth about her father and stepmother, which came with shocking details. Consequently, she found it impossible to trust anyone. Realizing that her own father, the man who had personally fed her breakfast every day and combed her hair, was capable of such terrible evil, she understood that evil was everywhere, impossible to escape. In her youth, she slept with scissors and a knife under her pillow, believing it the only way she could close her eyes and fall asleep. This fear eventually transformed into a fear that she herself could become a manifestation of pure evil, because the blood of murderer ran in her veins. Thoughts of what her father had done haunted her relentlessly. At the age of 10, Jenn even considered taking her own life. During that difficult time, she was actively supported by her mother, stepfather, and teachers. These close figures helped her resist despair, and she chose to embrace life. As a teenager, Jenn dated various guys but found it hard to hide the truth about her father. Many learned who he was and subsequently broke up with her. Eventually, Jenn concocted a story that he had died in a car accident, yet the truth became unbearable over time, prompting her to confess. Ultimately, she realized she had to confront her fear head-on. At the age of 20, Jenn visited prison for the first time in years to see her father. During all this time, he had sent her letters every week, but their content was bizarre. When they finally met, she did not even use the transparent barrier and phone but met him in person. Her father hugged her, and she felt choked with horror as he told absurd stories about the fortune teller Susan. Speaking as though he had last seen her only yesterday, he was completely unaware that he had been locked away for the last 15 years. As she left the visit, she realized he had not changed a bit, nor did he feel guilty. The father who had loved her simply no longer existed. After this encounter, Jenn contacted the families of Michael Carson's victims and apologized on his behalf. They all responded in the same way: she was not guilty and should not suffer for her father's crimes. After this, she began to manage her traumas, but her nightmares were far from over. In 2014, a reform of the correctional system was enacted, enabling Susan and Michael to request parole every 5 years. Jenn's nightmares returned once again when Michael applied for parole for the first time. Jenn was on the commission, but contrary to her previous stance, she argued that he was dangerous and did not regret the crimes he committed. She insisted that if he were released, he would kill again. The next attempt for parole took place in May 2020, but James was again refused. The court ruled that he would have the next opportunity no earlier than 10 years from then, which means in May 2030, when he turns 74, he will try to get out again. The situation with Susan was somewhat different. She also applied for parole in 2015, but her request was denied. The court ruled that she would not be eligible for another opportunity for 15 years. A lawyer took up her case, believing that this was too long a period. In 2023, the defense attorney's appeal was approved, so in December 2025, another hearing will be held, and Susan will have the right to seek parole. The families of the victims of these criminals, along with Jenn Carson, are waiting with bated breath for this moment, praying that the commission will make a negative decision. Jenn and her mother, Lynne, are still convinced that the real number of the killer's victims is much higher than 3. Determined to make a difference, Jenn decided to devote her life to helping people, particularly those who are contemplating self-harm. For this purpose, she received a doctorate in social work. Now, while helping others, she has found peace. Jenn understands that she cannot atone for her father's sins nor bring innocent victims back to life. She can only live her life in a way that brings as much light to the world as possible, and she is committed to doing this. A frightening call received to 911 reported a terrible crime that had occurred in the Eckerd family living in the state of Florida, United States. The love between 2 brothers was destroyed overnight due to jealousy over loving the same girl. Sean Paul Eckerd was born on October 12, 1990, in the small town located in San Diego County, California. His parents were Donna and Samuel Eckerd. He also had a brother, Stanley Elias Eckerd, who was 2 years older than Sean. Donna and Samuel had a total of 6 other children from previous relationships, but the media only mentioned the names of Jennifer. These children lived separately from the family on the other coast of the USA, in Florida. The Eckerd family settled in San Diego in a rented house, where Sean and Stanley spent their childhood. The boys grew up in love and care. It seemed their upbringing was calm and completely normal. Sean had charisma from child and was always very generous. With these qualities, he managed to win people over in their environment, practically making them fall in love with him. For Donna, in particular, Sean became a breath of fresh air in the family, and perhaps it was because of this that her affection for him was so noticeable. Due to the busy schedules of their parents, especially their mother, who was involved in work and church activities, Sean and Stanley were often left alone at home. The relationship between the 2 brothers was generally harmonious, although it was naturally not without episodes of quarrels, as often happens in family relationships. For example, it was common for Stanley, as the older brother, to make fun of Sean. Disagreements and disputes would often arise from this. As Sean grew up, he displayed a sociable and cheerful character, which contrasted with the calm demeanor of his parents. The Eckerd family did not communicate much with their neighbors and rarely made acquaintances. However, as Sean matured, everything changed. He managed to establish good relationships with everyone around him. At some point, this ability helped him become friends with their neighbor, Mary, who was from Torrance, located in Los Angeles County. She was a single mother of 2 children. Mary loved animals. She kept many different animals at her house, including horses, chickens, and sheep. The animals caught Sean's attention, leading him to visit her house frequently to help care for them. Sean began to spend more and more time at Mary's house, playing with her family, and he even became friends with her children. Over time, her house became a second home for Sean, especially during the times when his parents were not present or communicating much with him. Mary spoiled him and especially enjoyed having him around. At some point, he seemed to have become her child. Sean, Mary, and her children often went for walks to the observation decks of San Diego, just to admire the valley, which was one of Sean's favorite activities. However, in 2005, when Sean was 15 years old and had finished high school, he learned that the house where his family lived would be sold. When Sean found out that the house they were renting was going to be sold, he was heartbroken. He didn't want to move at all. The family had tried to find a place to rent in the area, but they couldn't find anything that fit their budget. His grandmother lived in Florida, and she had a house that she said they could live in if they moved there. So the family decided to move. Sean asked if he could stay with Mary, but his parents loved him so much they wanted him to stay with them. Mary remembers him crying when he arrived on the day he had to leave. The move occurred in August 2005. The family now lived in Spring Hill, Florida, in a house with a huge garden in the backyard. Both brothers enrolled in the local high school. Sean and Stanley adapted easily to the new environment, making friends both with their neighbors and classmates. Among their new friends, Samantha, a local teenage girl who quickly became friends with the brothers. Despite their busy new lives, Sean still missed Mary and her family. They kept in touch daily, calling each other to arrange meetings, leading Sean to dream that immediately after finishing school, he would return to California and continue living with them. In May 2006, Stanley revealed some news to their parents that left them utterly amazed. He announced that he was going to drop out of school. Stanley said that he wanted to devote more time to his hobby of studying martial arts and collecting swords. However, in reality, his desire to drop out was also influenced by the bad company he had fallen into. These unfavorable connections eventually led to his arrest in 2007 on charges of committing serious crimes related to fraud. However, later on, Stanley managed to get away with it. One of the neighbors knew Stanley, described him as a cheerful guy but called him a liar and a thief with obsessive thoughts, stating that he lied only to feel better. One of the Eckerd children described Stanley as a talented musician with a high intellect. Perhaps because of his rich vocabulary, the other kids considered him arrogant because they simply did not understand him. She said that people with high IQs often seem a little strange to others. She insisted that her brother was a good person. At the end of the same summer, Sean also approached their parents with troubling news, announcing his desire to drop out of school. Samuel and Donna feared a similar outcome, believing that Sean could follow the same crooked path as his older brother. However, Sean was not inclined to get into trouble. Instead, he soon got a job and joined the service team at a restaurant chain. Unfortunately, Sean often fell ill, which drove him to despair. He was forced to miss shifts at work, and soon he had to quit his job. Eventually, it turned out that he was suffering from encephalitis. Then, Sean even fell into a coma that lasted for 40 days. As his sister recounted, the doctors who treated him in Tampa said he had white lesions on his brain and considered his survival unlikely. His parents did not want to give up and insisted that Sean might wake up. Fortunately for them, it happened. When Sean finally awoke, he was in a deplorable state. He had lost about 20 kilograms and was greatly weakened. He had to undergo long-term therapy. During this difficult process, the Eckerd family was by his side. Donna, Samuel, and Stanley gave him unwavering support. Thanks in many ways to their efforts, Sean managed to fully rehabilitate and regain his health. Undoubtedly, such problems with their son affected Donna deeply. She experienced so much stress and suffering that she eventually developed heart problems. Sean, after going through this ordeal, wanted to return to school. Some of his friends and family members noted that he seemed to have begun to treat life more sensibly and appreciated every moment. Being in this mental state, in the summer of 2009, Sean decided that he was ready to go to California and reunite with Mary, his second family. He was greeted with great joy, which led Sean to tell Mary about his aspirations and plans for the future. Sean also shared his dream of becoming a physical therapist but noted that he would need money to make his dream come true. Sean and Mary were determined to figure it out, so they started looking for loans and grants. By this time, Sean took for granted that the right thing to do was to stick to his original plan of moving to California, and he told his mother about it. However, she felt that now was not the best time to let her son go, especially after all the suffering he had endured. Donna believed he would not be able to get proper medical care there. That with his parents, he had everything he needed to live, so she asked Sean to stay. It was an unpleasant decision for Sean, but he listened to his mother. Before parting from Mary, he promised them that he would return the following summer. At the same time in Florida, both brothers gradually began to warm up to Samantha, their mutual new friend. In early May 2010, Stanley and Sean exchanged text messages with her. However, it was Stanley who eventually took the initiative and asked her out. Samantha happily accepted, and they spent a wonderful evening together. At the end of the evening, they drove back together, and just before saying goodbye, they kissed. Stanley took this as a sign that they were now in a relationship and informed everyone he knew about it. However, it turned out that this was not the case. After their date, Samantha realized that she liked his brother Sean, and after a few days, she began dating Sean. It should be noted that both Sean and Samantha informed Stanley about their relationship. For Stanley, this news was shocking, and of course, the relationship between the brothers deteriorated sharply. It got to the point where they were arguing emotionally even in front of their parents. Because of this, Samantha and Sean pretended to break off their relationship, started keeping it a secret. However, this led to false hope for Stanley. Blinded by jealousy, Stanley warned Samantha not to trust Sean, claiming that Sean only wanted to play with her feelings. On June 17, 2010, while Sean and Stanley were helping their brother, Sean confessed that his relationship with Samantha was ongoing and that his intentions were serious. Stanley pretended that this news did not matter to him. However, deep down, he felt an intensely strong anger flare up inside him. The next day, without considering what Stanley might think or do, Sean made plans for a date with Samantha. Early Saturday morning, June 19, 2010, they said their goodbyes and went home. Sean immediately returned to his room and locked the door, planning to rest. However, Stanley had completely different plans. He quietly crept up to the door and opened it, bringing a rope with him. At first, the brothers just started arguing, but very soon their conversation escalated into a loud argument about courting Samantha. Suddenly, they attacked each other, and the fight took an unusual turn when Stanley threw a rope around Sean's neck. According to a later account, Stanley stated that at some point, they just fell to the floor, and Sean received a fatal blow to the neck. In horror, Stanley approached him and suddenly felt that the body of his younger brother was slowly freezing. Eventually, Sean's heart stopped, and he breathed his last in Stanley's arms. In a state of shock, Stanley began to deny what was happening. He placed Sean's body on the bed and started questioning how they had come to this tragic outcome. At that moment, Stanley could think of nothing better than to dig a grave in their garden with his own hands. Once he completed this task, he pulled his brother's body out of the window and lowered it into the hole. At the moment he began to bury Sean, their mother, Donna, woke up and strange muffled sounds outside the house attracted her attention. Noticing her son, she asked what he was doing. Stanley replied that he was simply burying some of Samantha's things because he didn't want them to continue reminding him of her. Donna was satisfied with this answer and left, allowing Stanley to continue with his terrible plan. He successfully completed the burial and devised a plan. He intended to dig up and bring Sean's body away in 2 weeks when his parents left home. Afterward, Stanley went to Sean's room and took Sean's phone to message Samantha while impersonating him. He claimed that Sean wanted to break off the relationship. Around 9:30 a.m., when Samantha woke up and saw these messages, she didn't know what to think or feel. Considering the previous evening, such words from Sean seemed absurd. Shortly after that, Stanley texted Samantha from Stanley's phone and asked her to call him back. He tried to convince her that Sean had packed his things and left for California. Before ending the conversation, Stanley added that things were calmer at home now. That same day, Samantha visited the Eckert house to collect some of her belongings. Offering to give her a lift, Stanley confessed that he still loved her and expressed hope that with Sean's departure, they could try to start anew. On Sunday, June 20th, 2010, Donna celebrated her birthday, coinciding with her father's celebration. Deciding not to miss the opportunity, they organized a party to celebrate both occasions. However, without Sean, it felt as though they could not enjoy the day. They tried calling him many times, but to no avail. At some point, Sean finally responded, but only through a text message. This was completely uncharacteristic of him, as he had never ignored his parents' calls before, prompting them to realize that something was wrong and fear that something terrible had happened to their son. On June 21, 2010, Jennifer went to her parents' house to check for any news about Sean's whereabouts. During a conversation between Jennifer and Donna mentioned the strange pit that Stanley had dug the day before. "I don't quite understand, will this make any sense?" Jennifer asked. She then urged their father to inspect the hole. As soon as they began digging, he fell onto his son's arms and legs. Panicking, he screamed in horror and quickly pieced together the grim reality. Jennifer dialed emergency services, but her voice was so broken that the dispatcher struggled to understand the situation. Meanwhile, Samuel was screaming non-stop, making it difficult for the dispatcher to grasp what was happening. At this time, Donna ran to Stanley's room to find out what had happened. She found her son sitting on the floor, sobbing and asking for forgiveness while claiming it was an accident. Meanwhile, Jennifer begged emergency services to send the police, fearing that Stanley might attack the rest of the family. After a harrowing 7-minute call, the police finally arrived at the Eckert house. There, they found Samuel kneeling in front of the hole, digging with his hands and trying to pull Sean's body out by his arms. An officer ordered him to stop, but he did not comply. The police had to forcibly lead the grieving father away. A few minutes later, Donna emerged from the room with Stanley. He was arrested on the scene and taken for questioning. During his interrogation, Stanley changed his account of events several times. Initially, he claimed that his brother was addicted to illegal substances and deep in debt. Then, one day, when he went into his room, he saw Sean attempting to end one's own life. Stanley asserted that he tried to stop Sean from what he had planned, but his efforts were in vain. He tried to convince the police that he hid his brother's body because he wanted to spare his mother the enormous pain of loss. After 2 hours of interrogation, under pressure from the police, Stanley finally admitted what truly happened and disclosed that the reason for the quarrel was Samantha, at 10:30 p.m. on the same Monday. Stanley was taken to Hernando County Jail to be held without bail on a charge of second-degree murder. 2 days later, the forensic experts performed an autopsy on Sean's body and presented the forensic analysis results to the court. The report stated that Sean had visible bruises in the muscles under the skin of his neck, which clearly indicated that the area had been compressed, making breathing difficult. The examination concluded that death was caused by traumatic brain injury and neck trauma. To determine whether the case warranted first or second-degree charges, Deputy State's Attorney began a thorough review of the case's circumstances. A first-degree charge would mean that Stanley could face the death penalty. On February 25, 2011, the first hearing was held before District Judge. In the second row of the courtroom were Samuel and Donna, who were clearly shocked by what was happening. Although prosecutor insisted on a first-degree charge, he confirmed that he would not seek the death penalty. Immediately after Judge announced that the hearing would be adjourned, Stanley, pale and handcuffed, made a calming gesture toward his parents. They were both sobbing. In the end, Stanley was charged with first-degree murder, but he was offered a plea deal. If he pleaded guilty, he would spend no more than 20 years in prison. To everyone's surprise, Stanley chose to stand trial, essentially giving up the opportunity to go free. The trial began on April 9, 2013. The defense was led by attorney Alan Fanter, while prosecutor Pete Magrino remained in charge of the prosecution. The main goal of the prosecution was to convince the jury that the defendant had carefully planned the crime. During the discussion of arguments, Prosecutor Pete addressed Stanley directly. However, Stanley maintained remarkable composure and did not admit to what Pete was trying to elicit. The prosecutor then announced to everyone present that the motive for the crime was Stanley's jealousy and that everything pointed to premeditated actions on his part. In response, Attorney Allen argued that it was a spontaneous fight that led to a tragic accident. He emphasized that despite Stanley's obviously unsuccessful attempt to cover up the evidence of the crime, he was motivated by good intentions, trying to protect his mother. Allen appealed to the jury not to let Stanley's attempt to cover up the crime cloud the true essence of the events. After hearing the testimonies, the jury, consisting of 9 women and 3 men, deliberated for 2 hours on April 12, 2013, and concluded that the crime was not premeditated. Consequently, they found Stanley guilty of second-degree murder. Despite efforts by Donna and Samuel to obtain a new trial, they were not granted this opportunity. During the final hearing held a month later, on May 13, 2013, emotions overwhelmed both parents. Through tears, they begged judge to reconsider the case, with Donna recounting the defense arguments. The judge tried to calm them down, noting that no parent should have to endure what they were experiencing. However, he concluded that the crime was too serious and the perpetrator had to be punished. Therefore, judge sentenced Stanley to 50 years in prison without possibility of parole. In turn, Stanley publicly apologized to his family and confessed to his actions. He admitted that he would never be able to atone for his guilt. From California, Mary watched the trial with a broken heart. Looking at the valleys of San Diego, she remembered the wonderful time spent together with Sean and felt profound sadness, realizing how lucky she had been to meet such a remarkable man. The tragic saga of the Eckerd family serves as a haunting reminder of how jealousy and unchecked emotions can shatter familial bonds and lead to irreversible consequences. Sean Paul Eckerd's vibrant life, marked by charisma and dreams of a brighter future, was cut short by his brother Stanley's act of violence, leaving a community in shock and a family in perpetual grief. The courtroom's verdict, while delivering justice, could not mend the wounds inflicted on Donna, Samuel, and their loved ones. They almost lost both of their sons. Sofia Maria Martinez was born on November 14, 1981, in El Paso, Texas. Her parents, Juan and Maria, immigrated from Mexico in the late 1970s in search of a better life. They worked multiple jobs to support their daughters. She grew up alongside her 2 sisters, her older sister Dulce and her younger sister Marianne. Since a young age, they have shared a close bond. When Sofia was 12, family tensions arose, and her parents divorced in 1995. 3 sisters live with their mother, who later remarried a successful man named Iladio and had 2 sons with him. Meanwhile, Juan began a new family, leading to reduced contact with his daughters from his first marriage. Despite this, Sofia did not hold any resentment toward her father and developed a good relationship with her stepfather. Sofia grew up to be kind, outgoing, and compassionate, often helping her mother with the younger children and providing them with support. She had a particularly strong bond with her younger sister, and they were best friends. At 15, Sofia took a part-time job as a sales associate at a local mall, saving money diligently over the years. She dreamed of owning a bright red Pontiac. Knowing about her dream, her mother and stepfather gifted her the remaining amount she needed to buy the car when she turned 18. In November 1999, Sofia proudly drove her brand new car off the dealership lot, a vehicle she had long admired. She took great care of it, keeping it clean inside and out, and drove it carefully. The car was a source of pride for her, and she never allowed anyone else to drive it. By the year 2000, Sofia was preparing for her graduation and was excited about the upcoming senior prom. She carefully selected the perfect dress, shoes, and accessories for the big night. Weekends were spent shopping with her sister, trying on outfits, planning hairstyles, and choosing makeup. In February, the senior yearbook photos were taken, capturing students in their graduation caps and gowns, and Sofia was filled with joy, eager to start college. She planned to pursue a history major at the prestigious University of Texas, with the ambition of becoming a teacher. Unfortunately, Sophia's dreams would never be realized. Although she had many friends, she had never been in a serious relationship. She focused on her schoolwork and job rather than dating. While she sometimes accepted invitations from boys interested in her, none of those dates turned into anything significant. In early March, her co-worker Justin suggested setting her up on a blind date with a friend of his. After some initial hesitation, she agreed, and they planned to meet on the evening of Friday, March 10th. They decided to go to a popular nightclub that allowed entry to those 18 and older, unlike most places that required patrons to be 21. On the evening of March 10, 2000, Sophia hurried home from school, excited to prepare for her blind date. She tried on at least 10 different outfits, stepping out each time for her family's feedback. Ultimately, they all agreed she looked stunning in a bright red evening dress that flattered her figure while remaining elegant and modest. She applied her makeup, styled her hair in soft curls, put on a pair of heels, and carried a small clutch bag. The final touch was her favorite perfume. By 10 p.m., she was completely ready. She entered the living room looking glamorous and twirled to show off her outfit. Her family was impressed, confident that she would make a great impression. She promised to be home no later than 2 a.m. since she had a work shift at the mall the next day, and no one was particularly worried. She was responsible and always kept her promises. At 10:10 p.m., Sophia left the house with a bright smile, climbed into her beloved red Pontiac, and waved goodbye to her family as they watched from the window. None of them could have imagined that it would be the last time they saw her alive. The following morning, her younger sister Mary peeked into her room and noticed something odd. She was missing, and her bed was not just neatly made, it looked untouched. It seemed she had left for work, yet her employee badge sat on the vanity, and her usual work shoes were in the corner by the closet. Mary informed her mother, and at that moment, the phone rang. It was a call from Sophia's employer, reporting that she hadn't shown up for her shift, something unprecedented. This alarmed Sophia's family, who were unsure about what to do next. Since she didn't have a cell phone, her family started calling the landlines of her friends, classmates, and co-workers. Unfortunately, no one had seen her since the previous night, and they did not know how to contact the boys she was with. They also reached out to local hospitals, worried that she might have been in an accident. By the evening, without any updates on her whereabouts, the family decided to go to the police to report her missing. They took a recent photo of her and provided a detailed description of her outfit when she left home, as well as specific information about the car she was driving. On Saturday, March 11th, police made a disturbing discovery in the New Mexico desert. They found an abandoned red Pontiac about 100 yards off the highway connecting Texas and New Mexico. The passenger side window had a bullet hole, and there were dark, dried stains resembling blood on the seat, steering wheel, and headrest. Experienced officers quickly suspected foul play and feared that the driver might be seriously injured or worse. The car was sent to a forensic lab for analysis. However, since the discovery occurred in a different state, law enforcement struggled to find a direct connection to Sophia. After checking the car's registration, authorities confirmed that the red Pontiac belonged to Maria Martinez from Texas. They contacted her to see if the car had been stolen and to find out that it had been driven by her daughter, Sophia, who had been reported missing the previous day. The family was baffled as to how Sophia's car ended up abandoned in a desert in a neighboring state and where she might be. Maria emphasized that her daughter cherished her car and would never have left it behind, suggesting that something terrible must have happened. One theory was that the vehicle had been hijacked and that Sophia might have been harmed, but there was still hope that she could be found alive. However, with no leads in sight, law enforcement was unsure where to begin their search. On Sunday, March 12, a group of teenagers walking near the outskirts of El Paso spotted something shiny in the desert and decided to investigate. As they got closer, they found the lifeless body of a young woman in a red evening dress. They hurried home to tell their parents, who called the police. Forensic investigators arrived at the scene within an hour. Officers discovered the young woman lying on her back, her face so disfigured that she was unidentifiable. Her dress was soaked in blood and covered with sand. Although no identification was found, police believed they had discovered the body of a girl named Sophia, who had been reported missing 2 days earlier. When Sophia's family was informed that a body had been found in the desert, her mother, Maria, refused to accept it, convinced that there had been a mistake and that her daughter was still alive. Her doubts disappeared when detectives showed her a photograph taken from the victim's bra. The picture showed Sophia holding her youngest brother, which confirmed her identity, as it was known that Sophia often carried photos of her siblings in her wallet. In her final moments, she had placed one close to her heart. The autopsy revealed that she had died from multiple gunshot wounds to the head, having been shot 5 times in the face. One bullet traveled through her head and was later found in the sand at the crime scene. The severity of her injuries left her with no chance of survival. Additionally, there were clear signs of a struggle, including severe bruising and indications of physical violence. The inner surfaces of her thighs were bruised and scratched, and forensic examinations confirmed internal injuries consistent with an assault. DNA analysis also provided biological evidence, and defensive wounds on her hands indicated that she had fought fiercely for her life but ultimately was overpowered. None of Sophia's personal belongings were found, except for a photograph she had hidden in her clothing. Due to the severity of her injuries, her identity could only be confirmed through DNA testing, as even dental records proved ineffective. Toxicology reports later revealed that there were no substances in her system at the time of death. Investigators discovered several shoe prints near the body. While most were unclear, one distinct impression helped forensic analysts identify the size and tread pattern of the sole. Authorities found only Sophia's fingerprints inside her car. Although her purse was recovered from the vehicle, the perpetrator had taken her license, keys, and cash. Her family was advised to change their locks and install a security system because the killer had access to her home address from her ID and had her keys. Her family followed these recommendations but lived in constant fear that the person responsible for her death might target someone else. DNA samples from the biological evidence left by the attacker were uploaded into the National Criminal Database, but no matches were found. This indicated that the suspect likely had no prior criminal record, complicating the investigation. Authorities also considered the possibility that the suspect was a transient who had crossed illegally from Mexico, committed the crime, and then fled back, making him even harder to track. A crucial lead emerged when investigators learned that Sophia had gone on a blind date the night she disappeared, arranged by a coworker. They sought to question both men involved. Since her family did not have their contact information, officers visited her workplace at the mall. Justin, the coworker who set up the date, was on shift that day and agreed to go to the station for questioning. The second man, Marcus, was also interviewed. During the interview, Justin explained that he had planned to meet Sophia at the club, but she never arrived. He and Marcus waited for her until around midnight before they left. He only learned that Sophia was missing the next day when she didn't show up for work. Both Justin and Marcus took polygraph tests to verify their statements, provided DNA samples, and turned over the shoes they wore that night. The results showed no connection to the crime, and their alibis were strong, as many people had seen them at the club. During a closer examination of Sophia's car, officers discovered a crumpled ATM receipt that had slipped under the driver's seat. The receipt indicated that at 10:23 p.m., she had withdrawn $20 from an ATM located just a few blocks from her residence. This detail became a crucial lead, as the ATM and nearby buildings had surveillance cameras. Investigators reviewed the footage from all available cameras and were shocked by what they found. The crime had been recorded from multiple angles, which helped them understand the sequence of events. At 10:22 p.m., a red Pontiac arrived at the ATM. The driver's side window was rolled down, and a young woman was seen withdrawing $20 from her account. The footage clearly showed that she was alone in the car. After taking the cash, Sophia paused for a moment to apply lipstick using her compact mirror. At that point, a figure dressed entirely in black, with a hood obscuring his face, crept up behind her car. She did not see him until he reached her window. Without warning, he pulled out a gun and attacked her in the head. His intention was not to kill her but to intimidate. The bullet grazed her cheek, clipped her nose, and exited from the passenger side window. Shortly afterward, despite her injury and holding a tissue to her bleeding face, Sophia withdrew another $200 from her account. The car then began to drive away from the ATM with the assailant now inside, holding a gun to the back of her head. Within seconds, the vehicle was out of view of the camera, and what happened next is unknown. It's essential to note that this took place in the early 2000s, a time when surveillance camera quality was not very advanced. The footage was grainy and lacked detail, making it impossible to produce a composite sketch of the suspect. All that could be discerned was that the attacker was a white male of average height with a slim build, possibly sporting facial hair. This information, along with video clips of the attack, was shared on local television to alert residents of the danger and encourage anyone who recognized the suspect to come forward. The investigation was lengthy and frustrating. After a news segment aired, police received numerous calls, but none of them provided useful information. As time passed, the investigation slowed, no new evidence surfaced, leaving authorities with more questions than answers. At the end of March, a man contacted the police, stating that he had found a driver's license near the spot where Sophia's body had been discovered 2 weeks earlier. The license belonged to a local woman, raising concerns that she might also have been a victim. However, when the police reached out to her, they learned she was safe and had not been harmed. She explained that her purse had been stolen earlier that month at a mall, where Sophia had also worked. Investigators believed the suspect could have been stalking potential victims and shared this warning with the media to alert other women. The very next day, a young man came forward, admitting to stealing the purse. He panicked after seeing the news and worried that police might link him to a crime he hadn't committed. He willingly provided a DNA sample and was cleared as a suspect in Sophia's case. By July 2000, the investigation had hit a dead end. To help generate new leads, authorities announced a $10,000 reward for information leading to the capture of the killer. Shortly after, Sophia's family launched a fundraising campaign to increase the reward amount, garnering support from friends, concerned citizens, and local organizations. By August, the reward for information had risen to $55,000. However, 6 months had passed since the tragedy, and no new leads had surfaced. Then, on September 30, 2000, a young woman named Heather Napa called the police, claiming she knew who was responsible for Sophia's death and wanted to share information in exchange for the reward money. Although there had been many false tips before, Heather claimed to have physical evidence. Heather, a 20-year-old mother of 2, alleged that her boyfriend, Michael Jacques, and their friend, William Berkeley, were involved in the crime. To support her claims, she provided a charred driver's license that belonged to Sophia Martinez. She explained that she had been afraid to come forward sooner due to fear of retaliation, but with Michael recently jailed and having no means to support her children, she decided to speak up for both the investigation and the reward. At that time, Heather was hospitalized for kidney issues, while Michael and William were both unemployed and struggling financially. On March 10th, William visited her in the hospital and pulled Michael aside for a private conversation. Heather overheard parts of their discussion and realized they were planning something illegal, which she assumed was related to their previous dealings with banned substances. She didn't probe for further details. Shortly afterward, they left, taking a box of latex gloves from a medical supply cabinet. Later that night, around 11 p.m., Michael returned to Heather's hospital room and claimed they had obtained some money. He said he had hidden near an ATM and signaled to William when a single driver approached. After the driver withdrew cash, William allegedly threatened her with a gun, took the money, and ordered her to get out of the car before driving away. Detectives were aware that this account did not match the actual crime, but they allowed Heather to continue. After midnight, a nurse informed Michael that William was waiting for him downstairs. They then left in separate cars, drove to a neighboring state, abandoned the Pontiac in the desert, and returned home in Michael's car. The next day, Heather was released from the hospital and felt anxious about whether the victim would report the crime. To reassure her, William showed her Sophia's driver's license, which noted down Sophia's home address. He casually mentioned that they could intimidate the victim into silence if necessary. Then, without hesitation, he threw the license into a smoldering grill and watched it melt before going to bed. A few days later, Heather watched a news report about Sophia's case and had a realization. She recognized William from the ATM surveillance footage and understood why he had altered his appearance by shaving off his beard and head. When she asked Michael about his involvement, he told her to keep quiet. Heather retrieved the burned license plate from the grill and hid it. She also noticed that Michael had a set of car keys with a Pontiac keychain, although she was unsure of what had happened to them. In August, William left home, and in September, Michael was arrested for distributing banned substances. By that time, feeling safer, Heather decided to come forward and find a way to earn money by providing information to the police. After Heather's statement, investigators brought in 23-year-old Michael Jacques for questioning. Surprisingly, he acknowledged his involvement and agreed to tell his version of events. He claimed that he had nothing to do with Sophia's death but admitted that he helped William cover it up. Michael explained that he and William were in desperate need of money and planned to rob someone at an ATM. When they saw a young girl in a red Pontiac at the ATM, Michael wanted to call off the robbery. However, William misunderstood his actions as a signal to proceed. Although Michael knew William had a gun, he never thought it would be used. The situation quickly escalated, and before Michael realized what was happening, the car sped away. He waited for about 30 minutes, but when William didn't return, he went back to the hospital to be with Heather. Michael insisted that he didn't know what happened to Sophia afterward and denied any knowledge of the assault or murder. However, he confessed to helping dispose of the car. He later learned more information but chose not to report William, aware that he too would face repercussions. A key piece of evidence, a set of car keys, was later found on the roof of Michael's house, exactly where he had thrown them. William Berkeley, the main suspect in the case, was arrested at his parents' home in early October. At just 20 years old, he had no criminal record, but those who knew him reported a pattern of aggression and cruelty dating back to his school years. He had previously assaulted classmates, former girlfriends, and even his mother, yet none of them had reported these incidents to the police. Despite this violent history, William was a talented artist whose work had been showcased in galleries. During his first interrogation, he admitted to robbing and killing Sophia, claiming he needed the money, but he avoided specifics. He insisted that their encounter was consensual and stated that the shooting was accidental. As interrogations progressed and he understood the seriousness of the accusations, he changed his narrative. He began to portray himself as a victim, claiming he was part of a plan led by Michael. William said that Michael had selected the car, believing the owner of a Pontiac would have substantial funds. Unfortunately for them, Sophia only had $220, which they viewed as the price for her life. In the lead-up to the trial, William and Michael tried to shift the blame onto each other, but the evidence presented against William was compelling. Authorities found the murder weapon, a handgun, at his home. His DNA was found on Sophia, and a pair of sneakers matching the footprints at the crime scene were found in his bedroom. On April 7, 2002, William was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to death by lethal injection, which was carried out in the spring of 2010. Throughout the years before his execution, he showed no remorse for his actions. Michael Jacques was also found guilty on November 3, 2002, of conspiracy and evidence tampering, receiving a life sentence with the chance of parole after 40 years. Heather, who had been promised a $55,000 reward, received the money but found no joy in it. She lost custody of her children and, at the age of 35, died from complications related to a chronic kidney condition.